Okay, so welcome everybody. My name's Lisa. I'm going to be chairing this rewilding session today, and thank you very much for all joining on this lovely day. So this is the last in our countdown to COP series of climate-themed events. Thank you all for supporting us over the year. And this is organised jointly by Transition Chesterfield, Chesterfield Climate Alliance, Derby Climate Coalition, and Derbyshire Climate Coalition. And I recognise many of you from those organisations. So we've got three fantastic speakers today to talk about rewilding. And I'm sure many of you know, but rewilding is, restoring biological diversity to a state closer to a fully wild ecosystem. So we're going to have all three speakers present, and then we're going to open up to questions. And hopefully you can all stay muted during the presentations. When we get to the Q&A, either just put a Q in the chat or raise your hands, although hopefully, if it's in the chat, I can see which order the questions are in. And I will do a summary write-up of today, and we'll have the recording available afterwards. So without further ado, we'll kick off with our first speaker today, Andrew Ramsey, who is Head of Discipline of Environmental Sciences at the University of Derby. Andrew is an ecologist and conservation biologist and teaches undergraduate and postgraduate at Derby. He's programme leader for zoology and one of the research leads for eco-sustainability and evolution in their Environmental Sustainability Research Centre. And he's also author of a blog on biodiversity loss and why it matters. So Andrew, would you like to share your screen? And thank you very much for joining us today.
Certainly will. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for the invitation. Morning, everybody. I'm going to do, when my share screen works, there we go. I'm going to do an introduction for you on an introduction to rewilding and the biodiversity crisis. There we go. I wasn't quite sure how to pitch this, so I've tried to pitch a middle ground. There's a bit of science here. There's a little bit of basic fundamental introduction. So I hope I've pitched this right for you. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a bizarre picture about someone called Michael Sewell and an aeroplane. Michael Sewell is known as one of the fathers of conservation and biology, and he passed away last year. He made an analogy between ecosystems and aeroplanes. An aeroplane flies. We're reliant on the bits of that plane to keep that plane going. If the odd nut and bolt falls off, it's probably not too much of a problem. But the more you start to lose nuts and bolts and bits of the plane stops functioning properly. And eventually that plane stops being an aeroplane and becomes a piece of metal that plummets to the ground and crashes. Basically it crashes and burns. Well, our ecosystems are, of course, very, very much like that an aeroplane. We've been exploiting and over-exploiting our ecosystem and damaging our ecosystem, the equivalent of removing little nuts and bolts. And so our ecosystems, like that plane, are now getting shaky. Our ecosystems are getting to the point where, they are no longer functioning correctly. We've over-exploited species like sharks currently with finning. We've damaged ecosystems through agricultural intensity and pollution. We've spread exotic species around the planet, which damages our ecosystems. So we've had, quite a lot of we've had quite a lot of influence on this planet that's negative affecting it. We've got species like the mamo just here in the top right, driven to extinction because on Hawaii, because the plants it fed on were driven to extinction. Okay, very specialist feeder. The plants it's fed on were driven to extinction because of introduction of things like pig farming. So we're losing species. We're losing these species, the nuts and bolts, at an increasing rate. If we look at the rates of extinction, this is a very famous graph which has been slightly altered, but kind of prehistory extinction was around about one species per 1,000 species per 1,000 years. So if we look at the past 50 to 300 years, we're maybe averaging somewhere between 10 and 50, depending on the species that you're looking at. In the future, it's been modeled that we're going to lose perhaps over 1,000 species per 1,000 years. So effectively, everything becomes extinct. There's an example here of birds, and this is what's been happening to bird species. The data from 1988 to 2016. You might be familiar with the IUCN categories of species extinction, but they go from least concern to near threatened to vulnerable to endangered to critically endangered to extinct in the wild to actually extinct. The red circles show a huge movement during this period of species moving from least concern, i.e. probably no problem, to moving into threatened status, from threatened status into endangered, from critically endangered to extinct in the wild, and then on to extinct. Whilst people have made enormous efforts for conservation, we've got much fewer species moving the other direction. Okay, so maybe we need a bit of a change in paradigm in terms of what we're doing to try and save species from extinction. Now, I expect I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's questions about why do we care? What does it matter if some Hawaiian honey creeper becomes extinct? What does it matter if we lose pandas or the odd insect or the odd plant? I mean, who really cares? The sun will rise tomorrow. Well, of course, nature supports us. It's our support mechanism. It provides ecosystem services. It provides things for us for free. Okay, we often divide these into things that support us, like photosynthesis, providing food, like provisioning things, providing fish and wood and pollination for our crops. Cultural things like recreation and...
Thank you very much for your question. One of the challenges is working in silos, especially in local government. I don't know if you work in government, Anna, but if you do, please keep listening. There are often separate teams with...
Oh, hello. Okay, I heard a bit of chat there. Anyway, I'm back on track now. Okay, so there are these cultural things like education, recreation, okay, us going out into nature and restoring our mental health. And they're very important in terms of climate change. There are these things like storing and sequestering carbon, okay, things like flooding control, like cleaning our water, like cleaning our air of pollution. So all of these ecosystem surveys provide some nature-based solution to the problems that we've got. So, you know, the UN reaction to this as part of the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which runs from this year until 2030, is to look at restoring some of our degraded ecosystems, to restoring some of this, some of these ecosystem services by restoring what we call natural capital, you know, the trees, the forests, the peatlands, the grassland meadows, etc., which can provide these ecosystem services for us. Okay, so rewilding, which is what today is about, and you're going to hear some great examples, and some of you are going to see some great examples, I'm sure. Rewilding is a way of restoring nature. Now, there are various ways or various approaches to rewilding. Almost everybody's got their own definition and their idea of what rewilding is. But it can go from an extraordinarily small scale, restoring a single field or a single woodland, to restoring almost on a continental scale, if you want to. Now, Michael Sewell, the chap he introduced in the first slide, he was one of the first advocates of rewilding. You know, back in 1988, he talked about rewilding as, you know, basically putting back things like big carnivores and also linking pockets of habitat together so that we had corridors that things could move through, a continuous landscape for species to live and thrive in. I'll move on to passive rewilding. Passive rewilding is where basically people allow a natural succession, so that we go from a very managed ecosystem, like say a highly intensive grassland, to a succession through to whatever the climax vegetation is. In this country, normally that would be a climax through to forest. So you let nature take its course in passive rewilding. Then we have translocation rewilding. So translocation rewilding, you're often giving nature a helping hand. You are reintroducing species. You are planting certain trees and plants in order to give nature a kickstart. I have to say this is my preferred version, but there are lots of very influential people who think that's a terrible idea and you should just have passive rewilding. And then Pleistocene rewilding. Some people think this is just a joke, but this is about putting things back into ecosystems which have been gone for a very, very long time, which can help to build up the ecosystem services. So, for example, in North America, where they used to have mastodons and American cheetahs and all sorts of species which have, you know, disappeared about 13,000 years ago. There are some people who want to take the equivalents of those, so take cheetahs from Africa and take Asian elephants, okay, and actually introduce those to take the place of those species which were lost a long time ago, and you know, we just can't clone them and bring them back. How are we doing for time? Just about there, really. Okay, so a couple of examples here. Probably the most famous example of some rewilding that took place was in 1995. Wolves were reintroduced back into Yellowstone National Park, up in the kind of northwest of the USA, around Wyoming and Idaho and Montana. Okay, you can see the environment. It's an upland environment. It snows, it's cold for a lot of the year. Now, wolves were excavated by the national park, okay, who thought he was putting tourists off. So they drove the wolves out, okay. That meant there were no predators for the elk that you can see bottom left there. I know we'd probably call that a red deer, but the Americans call it an elk, okay. And so the elk grazed and grazed and grazed and damaged the ecosystem, okay. A little bit of science here is that reintroducing the wolves had a positive effect. In this top graph here, you can see that, so in this top graph here, you can see that the wolves increased, okay? They overpopulated themselves, they did decrease a little bit. What did that do to the elk that they preyed on? Well, it decreased the elk population. That increased the amount of browsing, okay, which on certain trees like aspen, increased the amount of aspen, it increased the amount of willow, it increased the amount of cottonwood. That's all great for carbon sequestration. It provides great habitat for certain species. It also reduced competition with the bison. Bison were recovering anyway, but the bison, okay, increased. Some people say it also helped bring back the beaver. I'm not so sure of this because this little point here is where they actually reintroduced the beaver. So this may have happened without the wolves. Anyway, you can see that this had a really positive effect on the ecosystem. Okay, the ecosystem was restored, it functioned better. Okay, can't seem to change slides now. I don't know what I've done there. Let's get rid of that. Let's hope I can change slides. Oh dear.
It sometimes sticks a bit in Zoom, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly stuck a little bit in Zoom here. Okay,
you just got to keep just keep trying.
let me tell you what's on the next slide. So in the next slide, an example of Costa Rica. It's a reserve called the Bihagwal Reserve, and the reserve there was basically a grassland. Okay, it was grazing cattle. A friend and colleague of mine decided to buy this area and restored it. Okay, and he's managed in 30 years to turn a grassland ecosystem into a tropical rainforest ecosystem. He's got incredible species coming back, like jaguars and tapirs. He's got howler monkeys on his property. He's got fantastic endangered tree frogs coming back. So it's absolutely phenomenal, the effect that he's actually had. So oh, there we go. So there you go. There's Bihagwal Reserve. We are working again. So kind of my last slide. I seem to have kept the annotations, but never mind. My kind of last slide is that we've got this current problem. We've got these global emergencies. We've got this biodiversity crisis. We've got this climate change crisis, okay, caused by human pressures, okay, which have denuded our ecosystems. One of the solutions here is that we can restore small and large areas. We can get biodiversity functioning again. The outcome from that can be that we have better biodiversity, better ecosystem services, more carbon sequestration, and a better outcome for global sustainability, the future of biodiversity on this planet, and the future of us. And that's it. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a really brilliant and engaging overview of the whole reason why we need rewilding. I love that analogy of the airplane. I've not heard that before, and that was interesting as well. The classification of different types of rewilding, which may account for some of the confusion I've had over this. Okay. So we'll now move to our next speaker. So Matt Buckler is Head of Nature Recovery Networks at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. He's also a councillor for Derbyshire Dales District Council, which is very nice. First councillor speaker we've had. And as many of you know, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust is the leading conservation charity in Derbyshire. They've got 49 nature reserves across the county, countless conservation and wellbeing projects, and a number of rewilding projects, including Thornhill Carr Nature Reserve, which Matt is no doubt going to tell us about now. So Matt, would you like to start sharing? And thank you very much for joining us.
Right, okay. Hello. In the length of time that it's taken for us to get around to doing this, my job title has changed. So I'm no longer the Head of Nature Recovery Networks, I'm the Head of Wilder Landscapes. Yes, I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of the stuff that we're doing at the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. So this picture is of Willington, and this is going to be one of the case studies that I'm going to be talking about. So Derbyshire Wildlife Trust started, this is our first nature reserve. This is Overdale in the Peak District. And we, as you said, we've got about 50 reserves because of land we manage for other people. And we were set up to manage land in the ways that lots of charities were, where they picked key bits of landscapes, assuming that the land around them was going to be managed in roughly the same way. And one of the things that's happened is that the land around nature reserves has not been managed in the way that it was before, and so they've become much more isolated. Nature reserves have become little tiny islands in the landscape, which has been seriously problematic. And that that's what's caused some of the stuff that Andrew was talking about in terms of the loss of species, because the sort of the areas around the nature reserves that we've got have disappeared. So in 2010, the government commissioned a report from Professor John Lawton, which came up with 4 principles, which is shown on the map underneath this slide, which says that the areas managed for nature should be managed better, they should be bigger, there should be more of them, and they should be connected where they can. And this sort of has fed into our current strategy. So before we did stuff to protect really important bits, and actually we realised that's not working because of the losses of stuff in the losses of species and habitats in the space around our nature reserves. Things were disappearing, and so our strategy has moved from being one of protection to one about nature's recovery. We look to work with natural processes as well, because we previously managed stuff, and lots of people manage stuff for manage sites for things that they want to see. So they would manage for butterflies, or they would manage for orchids, or they would manage for bittern, and actually, we've started to think about ecosystems and in making sure that there are natural processes working. And in terms of the passive rewilding, we're definitely not talking about passive rewilding, because as Andrew said, that there are species which have gone, and the processes which have disappeared means that what's coming back is a completely different will be a completely different ecosystem. So, for example, large herbivores will have always lived in the UK, and they've just been eradicated. And so, if you don't manage, using large herbivores, then you get one process, which is the succession, which Andrew talked about. And then another thing which has sort of been quite inspirational is a book called The Serengeti Rules, which talks about various ecosystem restoration projects around the world, and says that we don't know everything. And so, we don't know what's missing. We don't know what's gone. And so, if we're managing with one thing in mind, we don't know what isn't there, which was having a big impact on it. And so we're starting to think about, looking at the ecosystems as a whole. So looking at a case study, this is Willington. It's 47 hectares. It's got reed beds, open water, woodland, and rivers running through it. Just downstream of this is the village of Willington, which is fairly regularly flooded. And this picture is of how we've managed this in the past. To the succession, reed beds are colonised by willows, which is not a surprise. And what we did in the past, so the historic management of this was that we would go in, fell the willow trees, burn the brush on site, treat the stumps to stop them coming back, because what we wanted was reed beds without willow in it. And when I started, I looked at it and said, well, what species are dependent on fire sites in wetlands? There are 0 species in the UK which are dependent on fire sites in the wetlands. So we're not doing that anymore, because there will be species that are dependent on the brash that comes in. So we won't do any of burning of that brash. What species are dependent on stumps which have been killed by glyphosate? There are no species which are dependent on stumps which have been killed by glyphosate, so we're not going to do that anymore either. And so we do coppicing. And so we said, actually, what we're doing here is mimicking the work of beavers, because what would keep these sort of habitats open is beavers. And so we thought, well, why are we bothering to do this work mimicking beavers when we could just reintroduce beavers? And so that's what our project at Willington has been about. I hope that some of you have seen about the work that we're doing at Willington. and we should have 2 families of beavers coming into Willington. The first one's coming this week, and you know that what you just look at it and think, going back to the Serengeti rules thing, we don't know what impact everything has. There may well be species which are there may well be species which play a critical role in the ecosystem, which are currently only, which are only found in the saliva of beavers. We don't know what's missing, and so let's try and reintroduce all of the natural processes we can. So why are we doing this? For the same stuff that Andrew talked about. The ecosystem services which are provided by wetlands are really important. You go to Willington and it's quite blocky because it's a formal gravel pit. What we're hoping that the beavers will do is try and smooth out some of the edges, so that we get more carbon sequestration, more water across the landscape, which should help to reduce the risk of flooding in Willington downstream. So that's how we're doing management better. We're also looking at doing it bigger. This is a picture of Willington. This is Willington at the moment. It's about 46 hectares. The land next to it is owned by Cemex. We're taking on more of this land. The first bit will be 11 hectares. And the land that they've got planning permission for gravel extraction is about 200 hectares. So what we're hoping is that within the next sort of 15-20 years, we'll have a 200 hectare site in the Trent Valley. And again, working, the thing about it being bigger is it's much easier to work with natural processes if you can do it at a bigger scale. And we're looking at this as part of the Trent Valley Vision. So we've done some work with other wildlife trusts, with the Environment Agency and with Natural England to try and connect up, habitats across the Trent Valley. We would like to do habitat restoration on about 70,000 hectares. Which is 20% of the catchment. What the wildlife trusts are looking for is 30% of land managed for nature by 2030. If we can get 70,000 hectares within this area, that'd be fantastic. And that is our aspiration. If you can you see my mouse? Can you see my cursor? If you can nod, Lisa, because I can see you. No, okay.
I can't see it right now, Matt. Just wiggle it around a bit.
Oh, wait a minute. If I do that.
Oh yeah. Now I can see it. That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the next bit we're going to talk about is the wild doe and forest, which is connecting this bit. So what we're looking for there, it's an area where we think there could be pine marten reintroduction, red squirrel reintroduction. It's going to take a while. The good thing about both those species is that what they need is lots of connected habitat. And from a climate change point of view, connecting the northern forest to the natural forest, which is what the aspiration is fantastic because it allows that north-south movement. So the northern forest and the natural forest both move across the country in east-west directions. From a climate change point of view, in terms of species movement, we need north-south corridors, and so we're looking to develop the wild doe and forest. We've just been awarded £750,000 from DEFRA to start this project off, which will look at doing sort of natural flood management work. And to do woodland creation work with landowners, and what we're hoping is that we've got about 18 months to do this work, and we're hoping for a roadmap for the creation of 30,000 hectares of woodland. That's going to take a while. But by 2050, we're hoping that there's 30,000 hectares of new woodland within the Derwent catchment. again, that's a natural flood management project, because one of the key things that we're really interested in doing is seeing is showing that where nature can help in terms of ecosystem service provision, as Andrew talked about. And then the next project, which is at the top of that catchment, is Wild Peak. And we've got various projects going on. So there's Thornhill at the bottom, which is at the moment being done, has been managed over the last few years from passive rewilding. We're looking at how we can put in place more processes. And the picture in the bottom right, this weird map with all the green stuff on it, is the Wye Valley, where there are lots of nature conservation organisations who don't really work together. And so what we're trying to do is to get a management plan written for the whole of all of the nature reserves within the Wye Valley, so that they're managed together as one unit. There's a Natural England land management pilot there, to get land managers around it as well. So that's quite a big area, and we will hope to do some more diverse management on that as well. We've been doing work to develop nature-based economy in the Peak District. It's one of the things that we found out in Foot and Mouth is that huge numbers of people, the economy of the Peak District isn't a farming economy. It's actually an access economy, and we would really like it to be an access to nature economy. And I think that, which is what Wild Peak is about, both in the Dark Peak and the White Peak. And that's going to involve species reintroductions. We are committed to doing more species reintroductions. Sort of thinking back to what Andrew was talking about, we've got a safety net. The ecosystems around us provide us with a safety net, and where species have been lost, we've gone out and cut sections of the net out. We don't know at what point the net is going to collapse. We should be doing what we can to tie that back in together, to reintroduce species, to rebuild that safety net. And that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt. That's totally inspiring what you're doing in Derbyshire. And both you and Andrew have presented what's a really scary picture, but with some very positive solutions, and it's very exciting. The whole north-south forest joining up the northern forest, which is Chesterfield here. We're at the south of that, and obviously the National Forest is just below the south of Derbyshire. So obviously Derbyshire is really key, isn't it? And I'm sure you're going to need lots of volunteers and donations to help you do that. So yeah, certainly do. Yeah, okay, but we'll get on to in the questions. We'll get on to what individuals or what communities can do collectively to help all this. So we'll move on to our third speaker now. So we've had a great introduction to theory. We've had Matt talking about Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and now we've got Dawn Ward, who is a local rewilding pioneer. And she's always loved growing, especially completing the full cycle with seed collection and vegan permaculture, and interest in the symbiotic relationship with nature and wildlife. And Dawn has just obtained over 2 acres on the edge of the Peak District in 2017, which was previous agricultural land, and is slowly rewilding that. And there will be a visit later this afternoon. I know lots of you have signed up for that. And just for those people that joined a bit late, if you could stay on at the end for 5 minutes, anybody that's joining the visit. But Dawn, would you like to start your presentation? And thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, so oh, sorry, my thing's not going forward. So the site that I acquired I've actually got half of the sort of field that's shown here on the right. So there's actually a boundary line here, and I actually have this side on the left. And it's 2.4 acres. It's very, very high. It's 300 meters above sea level. And it has some unbelievably high winds there from all directions, from, not just the north and the southwest, but the east and westerly winds are also very vicious, which, means that, a lot of things that would naturally be there would struggle. There was the previous owner of a field to the side of me had actually been trying to reintroduce different types of bees, and they found that because of the winds they actually all got blown away and didn't actually come back to her hives. So it is very, very bleak. The area around it has been cleared for agriculture, or just a little bit further that you can actually see a lot of area has been cleared for grouse shooting. Most of what we think is a natural environment within the Peak District, a lot of it is actually being produced by, you know, by the human agriculture and grouse shooting industry is actually changing that environment. A lot of this area would have once been wooded. So I come from this from not necessarily just a rewilding scenario. For me, rewilding is not enough. We need to change the way that agriculture is at this moment in time, without actually providing food for ourselves in a way that isn't fighting against nature. You know, we can turn lots of little plots of land, or large, as some of the two last speakers have shown, you know, into amazing, ecosystems. But unless we actually also address how we're producing food on the rest of that land, I think we're going to struggle to get nature back to a point where it's actually in balance. So my approach is both somewhere between passive and translocation. And I'm actually trying to do 4 different plots within the piece of land. So one part will be for rescue animals, which will also have a habitat that is okay for wildlife. One will be woodland, one will be grassland, and one will actually be agroforestry. So where you're actually providing trees that will actually provide food for humans through nuts and fruit. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. So on this land, one of the key moments from my point of view was the natural arrival of yellow rattle. I don't know how many of you may have heard of this amazing plant. It's one of the really key plants in biodiversity increase within a cereal crop field that's been overused for years. This comes in and it's actually slightly parasitic, and when it dies, it kills the grass around it and leaves a bare patch of soil, which allows other wild plants to actually then go into it, and slowly over time that actually increases the amount of plants that you actually have within that area. This picture here shows the difference, just looking down at the land, of what it was like when I bought it in 2017 and what it was like this spring, early summer. And you can see already, the difference is to me, the difference is phenomenal. And it's been quite amazing to see how that has changed, the insects coming to the land, the birds coming to the land. And now I'm actually starting to see more small mammals for the first time, not small mammals. I think there's been quite a lot of the very smaller mammals sort of came in quite quickly, but some of the larger sort of mammals are actually starting to actually be seen on it now. Oh, what happened there? Oh, wait a minute. Something went strange. There we go. Oh, sorry. I'll try not to touch the mouse in between because it's going forward on its own accord. So
temperamental Zoom sometimes, sorry.
Yeah. So at the moment, from agriculture, we've got between 21 and 30% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions are coming from agriculture. And a large amount of that is down to agriculture for animals, whether it's crops for animals or actually the animals themselves. If we actually switch much more to a plant-based diet and we think about how we're doing that within an environment that actually increases the biodiversity at the same time, then I think, the land use that we have will decrease, which allows us to leave large areas to be actually dealt with by people like, what Matt's doing. But, we've got to find that balance. We've got to find a place where we can still sustain ourselves. I don't think anyone's going to agree to allow everything to go back to biodiversity at the expense of humans not actually getting food, but we need to actually find a way of doing that in a good way. And there's a really good example of how organic agricultural practices are actually managing to absorb greenhouse gases. If you look up a company called a group called Tolhurst Organics, and they produce an enormous amount of food for their area around Oxford, in a way incorporating woodlands and hedges and beetle banks. So, oh God, I didn't even touch it then and it went back. Oh, wait, there we go. I do not know what's going on with my computer. I apologize. Oh, I'm not even touching the mouse. I'm assuming it's double clicking rather than one. So I really like the image of this land when I actually look at it on Google Maps, because you can really see already how many animals are actually moving through the ground. You may not actually see them yourself when you're there. It's actually very difficult to see a lot of creatures. A lot of them will be more nocturnal anyway. But, you know, you can see, because of the pathways that they make in the long grass from that image on the left, how much activity there actually is going backwards and forwards all over it. It's almost like the surface is cracked. It looks almost like a desert surface when you're looking at it from a satellite image. But that has actually means that the animals actually on the site are just increasing all of the time, and the activity of other species is increasing all of the time. I'm no expert, and I don't know what those species are, and I haven't got the technology to actually monitor a lot of them. But you know, I can see the changes happening. As I say, there's been a lot of insect activity, and strangely enough, I didn't have very many pictures of all of the different types of bees and bumblebees, which people are obviously much more familiar with when it comes to pollinating than they are with moths and butterflies. I'm guessing I haven't just taken photographs of those, but as the different plants have grown, more and more creatures are actually coming. And as I said, I also want this land to also be applicable to animals that need a place as well for us. You know, we've produced a lot of animals on this planet that we don't treat very well, and I want a place where they have also got a space to actually be safe. And that photograph there is a picture of one of a rescue sheep that's now 13-year-old called Blackberry, who also lives on the land. So there's been curlews came and landed on the land for the first time that I saw this year. That doesn't mean it's the first time. I don't live there, so they may have landed before, but it's the first time that I've seen them. Not nesting as yet, and I don't know what it requires for them to nest and whether they would, but you know, they've landed. I've seen them landed on there twice this year. Pheasants came onto the land in 2019, and there are 3 nesting females that I see regularly. I've actually only ever seen 1 male, so whether he has a harem or whether or not I'm only seeing him once, I do not know. Squirrels came for the first time this year, and that actually completely dumbfounded me. Yes, it's the grey squirrel, and I personally like the grey squirrel. I know it may cause problems within some people with what they feel is the ecosystem, but we've made these animals be on this planet, and I think we have a duty to actually protect them, whatever. I don't know why they've come onto the land when there aren't actually mature trees, but they're there, and I've seen a group of 3 or 4 of them moving along the trackway several times this summer. And I saw my very first rabbit there on Thursday. Again, whether they've been there for a little while and I haven't seen them, I do not know. So the side of it that is probably a bit more on the sort of translocational side of it is that I've planted a lot of trees on here. A lot of them have been planted very close together. So there's been 1,200 trees planted on there. Most of them have actually been planted this year. And this is to provide shelter belts and hedgerows. So I've planted from the Woodland Trust's shelter belt and their pollinator packs, which trees that are actually native and ones that are designed for the highland sort of style, higher locations as well. And this is to divide the land into smaller pockets of ground so that they will, as they grow, they will actually change the microclimate. So within those pockets of land, the temperatures will increase, the winds will decrease, and that will allow the different things to then be grown within those pockets. So my intention is to have about 25% of the land to have actually just open grassland that's just naturally changing itself. About a quarter of it will be dedicated to the rescue animals. About a quarter will go back to woodland with native trees, and about a quarter of it that will go through to agroforestry practices and permaculture practices. These 2 pictures are not actually of the land. These are actually pictures of mainly a lot of annual crops that are being grown in this way. So this is pictures from the Tolhurst Organics, and I should have put the figures up, but they produce masses of tons of food for the area around Oxford, where they have a box scheme, and they incorporate a lot of hedgerows and trees and beetle banks within that. And that helps to keep, you know, the predators alive throughout the year, gives them habitat to survive. And therefore, they don't need to use any chemicals in any way on that land. And because it's a veganic site, it means that there's no animal manures being put onto it. It's all being done through allowing the different natural legumes that actually to grow to produce green fertilizers in amongst the crop. So their crops are actually interspaced with wildflowers and legumes at the same time as the actual crop that they're going to harvest is growing. And all around the edges of those are trees and beetle banks and nettles and wild areas interlaced as well. So it's a really lovely way of seeing how nature goes together with actual food production for us as well at the same time. So thank you. I know that that's not necessarily fitted quite so fully into just the idea of rewilding. It's a little bit more unusual, but it's my take on it.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Dawn. And yeah, really great that, you know, as one individual that you've managed to achieve that on your piece of land. And I know, you know, not everybody owns land, but a lot of people can do things in their gardens as well. So, you know, ranging from the sort of large scale, you know, the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust to sort of micro scale, you know, we can all do our bit. So that's great. That's a brilliant set of presentations there that complemented you complemented each other really well. So we'll open it up for questions now. So if anybody would like to ask a question, you know, if you could just put a Q in the chat, and then I will come to you. I don't know, but maybe before, because I know everybody's really shy at first, I'll ask the first question. So just, you know, hearing about what can be done from all of you, what do you think is the best thing that we as individuals or as communities, you know, we can do individually or collectively to support, you know, this whole you know, rewilding or just, you know, making the world better for biodiversity? Andrew, would you like to start? Sorry, I've just sprung that on you.
Sure, I'll chip in there. I think the most important thing that people can do is to do something. And that doesn't have to be anything big. You know, the example that we've just had is fantastic. But, you know, as you said, not everybody can buy that amount of land and have that amount of insight, but everybody can do something. You know, I've just got, it's on the table in front of me, I've just got £20 worth of local wildflower seed. That's going into my garden. I don't have a very big garden, it's going into my garden, so that's going to be a wildflower meadow. Effectively, a lot of it will be in tubs. We've touched on this idea about connectivity and the fact that species have got to move from place to place to place. You know, that's true of a local population and of national populations. As climate change continues to kick in, species are going to have to move north, and they've got to have the right habitat to actually do that. Every little bit that we can do, whether it's in the countryside or in a town or in a city, every little scrap of land that we can provide for nature helps. Every little tree that you plant in your garden, every bit of rewilding that you do in your own garden actually contributes to that habitat. It helps us have larger populations. It keeps populations going. You know, we can make holes in our fences to allow hedgehogs to move through. There are all of these little things that we can do. You know, if everybody did that, it would be fantastic. We've had a project going for a couple of years now, looking at Derby and about actually rewilding the city of Derby. You know, Derby's already reasonably green, but the vast majority of the green in Derby actually comes from people's gardens. When you map it out, that there's tiny bits of natural habitat. There's a phenomenal amount of garden. So by rewilding those gardens, you make a huge contribution. you know, and if you do that, you know, it's like if you build it, they will come. If you provide that habitat, species will come back. I mean, you're not going to get the bears and the wolves and the things that can't come back because they're not there. But things will come back into your gardens, and you will be doing a lot for nature. You know, and if everybody on this call did that, that would be a huge contribution. And if you all convince 10 other people to do it, that becomes an enormous contribution. And so we start that ball rolling. Sorry, I'm going to say something else as well now. Sorry, guys.
Go on.
The other thing is that, although I think this has changed a little bit because of COVID, the amount of people who are actually aware of the biodiversity crisis is actually pretty minimal, and there's a big proportion who know and don't care. And I think, you know, myself as an educator and a researcher, it's important for me to reach out to people. But I think if everybody can reach out and help to convince people that we need to make change, and we need to make change now. It's not in 5 years' time. It's not in 10 years' time. It's now. You know, we absolutely need a new paradigm. If you remember that slide about all the red circles moving to extinction, all the green circles moving back, you know, those red circles are growing and growing and growing. And despite all the efforts that we've made for conservation, you know, since the 1980s when this has been growing, we still haven't reversed that change. And it's only by people taking action and wanting to take action that we can do that.
Can I just jump in there and sort of go on the back of what Andrew's just said, and say that there's also, you may have heard of the term guerrilla gardening. And you can extend what you're doing in your garden a little bit further. And there are many areas around. I mean, I live very close to the canal, and there are acres and acres of quite sort of open, rough land there that is naturally sort of going back towards biodiversity anyway. But, you know, you can also go out with some packets of wild seeds and wildflowers and actually sprinkle those in areas that are areas like that to actually speed that process along. You can do that. Sometimes what they do is they'll roll those seeds into clay so that you can just throw them down onto the ground and they will take on their own. You know, it's a way of speeding up areas that have gone to rough-land. You often see, you know, old areas where building sites have been, but they're just boarded up, and they, you know, they may have been like that for 10 odd years, but they look quite rough. And again, you can sort of increase that a little bit by throwing a few extra plants in there that are natural plants from our UK environment.
Can I bring Matt in? There's a suggestion from Dave Wells as well in the chat there, that everyone urges their council and MP to support the climate and ecological emergency bill. But Matt, can I just ask you about what people can do, but also with your council hat on, if I may? You know, there's a lot of planning issues. You know, councils have green infrastructure plans. You know, this whole wildlife corridor issue. I don't know if you could address that as well. But what can we best do?
Okay, so I'll talk about that mostly. So the first thing is to be more plant-based, because 96% of the mammals on the planet are livestock. So stop eating them. That'll, you know,
totally agree.
That'll make a big difference. The stuff that Andrew talked about, I don't know if you've seen bee lines from Bug Life, and one of the good things to do, I'm going to share my screen again, if that's okay. So this is Bug Life have got a bee lines website, and these are areas which various people have identified as specialists, as places where it would be really good to do habitat connectivity. So Chesterfield's in it, Matlock, the A6 corridor, Derwent corridor is in it. And if you've got sites in there, if you've done work in there, then stick it on the Bug Life map, because then other people can see it, and they can see that they're part of a bigger thing. You know, when you're doing a crowdfunder, the really important people to get in there are people who donate first, because then they can see that actually they're being part of something. And so getting people to go on to things like the bug lighting and record the stuff that they've done is really important, so that people can see that other people are doing things. And the other thing that I was going to say is get involved politically. Most politicians know nothing about the ecological crisis. Staggeringly poorly informed. We've done quite a lot in Derbyshire Dales since I got on the council, and it's just because I'm talking about it, and suddenly everybody else starts saying, oh, actually this is really good, this is something that people feel good about, and so they're not just giving us up. I don't know if you've seen stuff about Derbyshire Dales. All of our conversations are about bins. All of our conversations are about bins and biodiversity, because of the positive stuff that we're doing about biodiversity. So, write to your councillors telling them to do something about biodiversity, and they will do something about it, because there is lots of bad news in local government. And so anything that they can do which is a good news story will be really well thought of. And the other thing about that, the thing which nobody recognises, and which I didn't recognise until I became a district councillor, is about parish councils. Parish councils can do an awful lot within your communities. So get involved in parish councils and go to them with projects, and they will do it. And the fantastic thing about parish councils is they don't have caps on raising the precept. So parish councils are funded by are funded through council tax as well, but they get a very small amount. But parish councils can treble their precept if they want. But, if you did that, you'd probably have to have a referendum about it. But it's not gonna make a massive difference, and you could do really good projects within parishes by working with your parish council. I'm engaged with 5 parish councils because I sit on Matlock Town Council, and I've got 4 parishes within my ward. They do all kinds of things. It doesn't take very much to persuade them to do things. So get involved in parish councils as well as writing to your MP, and as well as writing to your district and county councillors.
You're very busy, Matt, and well done, because you're absolutely right. We have more power as individuals than we think through our sort of political representatives. And I know there are other councillors on the call today, and thank you to those for joining us. Can I just come back? I didn't know about the bee lines. Can you just explain a little bit about what is it that people can do? Is it things in their garden, or is it bigger projects you're talking about there?
It's both. I'm trying to get Derbyshire Dales to put the road verge stuff they're doing on it. It's stuff that you do in your garden. And I think if everybody, if you could talk to your neighbours about stuff that you're doing for pollinators in your garden, and you all put it on, suddenly that the sort of movement for doing that within communities becomes much bigger. And I'm working with one of my parishes is Northwood and Tinkersley, and they're looking to map the biodiversity which is in their community, and then they could put the whole parish in it. So it's of whatever scale you want to do, and anything that goes on there will be beneficial.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Christine from Doveridge. Christine, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Christine, do you want to unmute?
I asked the Parish Council in February, when they were considering a motion to become a best kept village, if instead they would become a biodiversity village. And since they've agreed. And I wonder what help will be available, perhaps from the council and Derbyshire Wildlife, to identify areas as well as gardens, and give advice on how we can go about this.
Yes. it's a designation that there hasn't been. Talking to Jackie about who's your district councillor, about the stuff in Durbridge, and saying about it being a biodiversity village, and it just seemed like a fantastic idea. What we need to do is to come up with a set of criteria which says that this is, nobody's done it yet. So so there's some work to do to work out how to do that, and I would be really keen on supporting it, but it'd be really good for it to be a national initiative, and I don't know whether, I don't know what we need to I don't know what we need to do. I just don't know what we need to do, which is a really poor answer.
Can I bring in Andrew, because Andrew's put something in the chat as well?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we've always got students looking for projects, whether they're zoologists interested in conservation, or we've got a new BSc in environmental sustainability, and they'll be looking for projects as well. Many of them are quite good at mapping, and they're trained in that and designing areas. So I just said in the chat, get in touch at the university and we'll see what we can do to get you a decent student, either a good undergraduate or master's student, to see what we can actually do. I mean, it's a smaller scaled down version, but equivalent to what we're basically trying to do with the whole of Derby. So yes, all of these things are dependent upon scales, but Matt gave the example of the bee lines. If you can get hold of biodiversity villages, functioning together with a bit of friendly competition with each other, that would be fantastic. Rather than Britain in bloom, let's have Britain in biodiversity or something like that. That would be fantastic. We should try to organise a local competition and dig out a little prize. That would be a really good investment, I think. Maybe we put it to one of the local councillors.
That is, Christine, go on.
Matt, are you on the new biodiversity working group in the Derbyshire Dales? And have you sort of got minutes on what you're doing, or have you got criteria on which you're working?
I am on that, yeah. There are minutes of it. It's quite focused on lands that we own and manage, and I've been pushing people to I've been pushing the council officers to be more focused on what we can do to support the community doing stuff, and I think that's really where we are going to see the changes. The district council owns nothing really, which is one of the things that we've worked out at the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust as well. We own a piddly little percentage of Derbyshire. We need to get other people to do it. We're developing a program called Team Wilder, which is getting people to act. I think if you talk to Andrew and work out how I tried to set this up by like a community nature partnership in Hilton, and it was too much work to do it when I was covering a big area. It needs so I'd be really keen to see how you do it. And I'm really keen to be involved in a steering group for how you set that up so that we can put that out everywhere. And I set up a group called Wilder Matlock to try, because I thought, as I'm part of this community, it's in my interest to do it. And then COVID hit, and so what you need to do is to stand around a big map and put post-its on it of where areas are, and that just wasn't happening. So I think there's have a conversation with Andrew about how it starts off, and then once it starts going, we can do something about it, and I'll definitely do something about it as a district councillor. What I can't do as a district councillor, because I've got 5 parish councils, and you know, head of wildland, you know, I haven't got any time, so I'm not going to push it, but I'll definitely support it when people do push it.
Well, I know Jackie, our district councillor, is very interested. She's also interested in developing a community orchard, and I know she would help a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine. That is the most brilliant idea, and I think you just sparked a sort of experiment that could spread across Derbyshire and the country. So, you know, I think a joint working with Andrew and the University of Derby and Matt would be fantastic. We'll just move on. And the next question for Margaret seems to be related. Margaret, would you like to ask, you know, about volunteers?
Yeah, just to say that it's my impression that a lot of these projects are kind of volunteer based. You know, I'm kind of involved in one, and it seems to involve use of a lot of volunteers. And I'm just wondering, what is the scope for increasing the number of people actually working on them? Because it seems a way that more people could be put into work and so on.
Who would like to answer that? Andrew or Matt or Dawn, any ideas? Andrew.
I can come in. I mean, it's a tricky one. As somebody who trains people in conservation biology, of course, I want as many people employed as I possibly can, because I want good outcomes for my students as well as good outcomes for the whole world. If we're going to do that, we basically have to find funding. You know, you have to find money in order to pay these people, and that is something where there's not a lot of it floating around at the minute. If you compare where we are now in terms of the number of people employed in conservation related activities to where it was 40 years ago when I graduated, it's you know, it's a very different field, and there are a lot more people employed. But if we're going to deal with this and deal with it sensibly, then you know, all these environmental problems, then you're absolutely right, we do need to employ more people. I do see more jobs being advertised around the sustainability and biodiversity agenda in places like councils. You know, there are a lot more big companies who appear to be genuinely interested in biodiversity and not just for greenwashing purposes. So I think it is happening, but you know, conservation is wholly underfunded, and I think it's only by continuing to demonstrate the value, and I mean it in lots of different ways, but the whole values of biodiversity to decision makers and politicians, that you will get people actually involved and investing more in biological diversity. You know, if you're planting trees, if you're managing a wetland like Matt was talking about, you know, which is helping to prevent flooding in a village, you know, how much does that save in terms of insurance payouts? You know, what nature does for us in this country every year is worth billions and billions of pounds. What the natural world in the sea does for us, what all those bacteria in the sea do in terms of treating, you know, waste products that we put into the sea, would cost billions if we had to actually replicate it ourselves. You know, we can't afford that. So in order to make sure we don't have to pay those billions, we should be paying more people to make sure that we don't lose those bacteria, to make sure that, you know, the sea doesn't become a dead zone for us. But in order to do that, we've got to get better, I think, at expressing what nature is actually worth, and then getting people to invest in, make sure that we don't lose all those ecosystem services. You know, we maintain that natural capital, we maintain the bacteria, the trees, the plants, everything, you know, we use the systems that have evolved in nature that maintain the resilience of this planet, that keep this planet habitable for us, you know, and we just invest in that. But it takes a sea change. Matt's pointed out, you know, the decision makers in this country know diddly squat about biodiversity and the environmental crisis, and that has to change, you know. But hey, there are more people voting Green. That can't be a bad thing.
I don't know if anybody else, but there's a complete mismatch, isn't there, in public policy priorities here, and you know, the values of biodiversity, and you know, what's spent on it is just terrible, really. Matt, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I'm probably a bit of an anomaly, because I'm actually phenomenally optimistic about it. I spent my entire life dealing with climate and ecological crises, and it's actually you know, there's more people talking about it now than there ever have before. You know, the government recently commissioned the Dasgupta review, which showed, you know, which actually I think you know, lots of their policy stuff, lots of the current government's policy stuff is very, very bad. You know, is very damaging, and is particularly damaging in terms of climate. But I think they do actually get the benefits of ecological diversity and you know, ecosystem health. I think you know, write to your councillors, get people to write to your councillors, because they can do something about it. And talk to them about it. Is really important. You know, that I think you know, this may sound weird coming from somebody who works for an environmental charity. You know, one of the things that the Dasgupta review showed is that nature is too important to be left to environmental charities, and so, you know, it needs to be part of every decision. But I think that you're underplaying the value of volunteering. You know, volunteering is really important, because one of the benefits that nature provides for us is the benefits to mental and physical well-being, and that's what, you know, that comes from volunteering. And so, you know, there should be support for people to be involved in it. You know, we've got projects going on with the NHS, which is about green social prescribing. You know, there are significant benefits to society which come from working in being in nature, and there are more jobs in conservation now than there have been for a long time, but they should be about getting other people to be doing stuff as well. You know, it should be something that everybody's doing, you know, which isn't just about volunteering, and which isn't just about it should be everybody volunteering, rather than the people who who've done it historically. You know, we need to get people in Derby doing stuff for nature, and we need to get people in, you know, across the country doing stuff for nature. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well said.
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah, sure, Dawn.
I think that we've seen this over and over again. It's not just obviously within rewilding. You know, as a member of Transition Town for Chesterfield, you know, we've seen that, you know, the councillors put the load onto volunteer groups. I work for Hope Valley Climate Action, who've managed to get enough funding to get me to do a renewables feasibility study for them. You know, so a lot of the time it is those volunteer groups that are pushing it through. There are some amazing, there's an amazing group up in Cumbria that are doing a lot of work on biodiversity and all sorts of things. But again, it's all come from the volunteer sector. Some of those have managed to have employed people because they've got lottery funding, which is, I think, you know, one way that you can really go big. And it would be really nice to see something like what's going on in Cumbria going on a lot around the whole of Derbyshire. And you know, but it is, I think a lot of this is being pushed forward by the volunteer sector, which is good because they're where the passionate people are, but they need funding to push it through more. They can't be expected to only all be doing it from the point of view of it being volunteer time. As Margaret said, you know, you need people that can dedicate, you know, 2 or 3 days a week at least to these things to actually get them pushed through. So it's finding that way of doing it. You know, even within my own land, I would have loved to have been able to get some funding or grants. I've paid for every single tree myself in the long run. You know, it's not easy, it's difficult.
Okay, I think the outcome from that discussion was we need everybody, we need volunteers, but it definitely needs to be better funded, the whole conservation effort. I don't know if Maggie Kelman is still here. I can't see her on the call, but she's put Maggie, are you there? She's put a post in about seeing more. She'd like to see more. Are you there, Maggie? I'll just read it out. I would like to see more education to raise awareness in the general public, how everyone can take action. And secondly, a ban on the use of peat in horticulture. We did discuss this at the last event because we had somebody from Moors for the Future about the, the ban on sort of peat sales. And Laura, you've also got a question about campaign against peat. I don't know if Matt or Andrew or Dawn have any thoughts on peat. Commercial use of or retail use of peat?
It's a bad idea.
It's a bad. Thank you.
We one of the first things that I did as the district council, as a town councillor, was to put forward a motion to ban the use of horticultural peat in our planters. Again, this is stuff that this is stuff that your town and district councillors can do. They will all have planting schemes, all those flower bed, all those. So we've got sustainable planting stuff in Matlock, and people can do something about that, and they can start talking about it, and then people realise that it's people see it's a bad idea.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you. Right, a couple of questions. One from Martin, and then one from David. Martin, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, hello. My question is, does every council have a biodiversity and sustainability officer? And if so, how are they linked together in order to promote more joined up public, community and council action? It will really make a difference. So I'm thinking that somebody to coordinate activity who has knowledge and can promote education, publicity, and actually drive the actions of people that probably haven't engaged with this. So obviously everyone on this call today is aware of the issues and is wanting to engage, but there's thousands and thousands of people out there that could be engaged by local councils as well as the voluntary sector. So what are the councils doing about it and how are they joined up?
Martin, can I just ask which council are you in?
Chesterfield.
You're in Chesterfield, okay. Matt or Andrew or Dawn, any do you know the answer to this?
I don't know the answer to this. I just say, I think there are lots of organisations though who could do more, not least universities, in terms of raising the profile of this in our local communities. But I don't know the answer to your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know the answer for Chesterfield is that we used to have one and we don't have one anymore. But we got a climate officer last year, but they're not, their remit doesn't cover biodiversity. So the answer is no for Chesterfield, but I don't know about other councils in Derbyshire. But it's a huge, as again, it kind of illustrates the priorities. Dave, Dave Wales, did you want to come in on this? You got your hand up.
Just that, Lisa, you'll be aware, aren't you, of Derbyshire County Council's emerging climate strategy, which I think will also involve some action on biodiversity. And so I think they will claim that they are joining up various councils' actions on this throughout Derbyshire. I think the proof will be in the actions rather than the words that they're putting forward at the moment. But I think that will be part of the strategy.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And again, another call to sort of contact your county councillor to make sure this climate strategy and the biodiversity aspects get implemented.
Can I just come in?
Oh, sorry, Andrew.
Yes. No, it's fine. It's fine. Just to say there are so many opportunities here for win-wins. There are so many opportunities for helping to deal with the climate crisis that are also beneficial for biodiversity. And for me, those are the projects that people should be pushing on and pushing forward on. The working on the development of peat that helps to sequester carbon, or trees that help to sequester carbon, or things that prevent flooding, or things that that are positive for biodiversity and positive for people. Those are the things that we should be investing in, because those are the things that we get the most bang for our buck out of. And it doesn't, you don't have to be so clever in order to recognise these. You know, if you're going to invest in flood prevention, you know, well, yeah, invest in the development of wetlands that will soak up that water before it all floods off downstream immediately and floods towns and villages and causes thousands or millions of pounds worth of damage. And for me, that's the direction we should be trying to work in.
And that also council's money. Matt, did you want to come back in on this point?
Yeah, I do know how many councils have got biodiversity officers. There are no councils in Derbyshire who have biodiversity officers. They all used to have them, they now no longer do. Quite a lot of them have climate change officers. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust provides their ecological, we provide ecological advice to all of the local planning authorities. They are all moving towards having biodiversity officers, or they've all got biodiversity leads, which is really good. Lead councillors. With the Environment Act coming through, the nature recovery networks and nature recovery strategies, every local authority will have to have part of that. Derbyshire County Council is currently doing natural capital mapping, which will inform their nature recovery strategy. That's due to be completed by August, September next year. So that they are all starting to do stuff. But again, you know, people don't understand quite how much pressure local authorities are under because of the amount of cuts that they've had from central government. Just keep writing to them. Just keep emailing your local councillors, and they will, because the more emails they get about things, the more likely they are to do something about it. So the key thing to be doing is putting pressure on putting pressure on your local councils. We're about to do an action to do with COP26 about getting all at the last county council election, all the Conservative county council candidates said that they would support work on biodiversity, and we need to start emailing them to ask them what it is that they're going to be doing. Having said they're going to be supporting it, we need to be emailing them to say, you said that you supported this. What have you done? What are you going to do? Because it's very easy for people in the run up to an election to say, we're going to be acting on biodiversity, and we need to see what they're actually going to do.
Okay, thank you, Matt. That's really helpful. Dave, is that an old hand or?
No, it's a new one.
Oh, go on then. Go on.
Just very quickly, to support what Matt's just said, yes, I'm a Green Party councillor in Amber Valley, and if there's anybody here in Amber Valley, please, yeah, write to me, saying those sort of things, because then that gives me ammunition to go to the ruling group. It gives me ammunition to go to the officers saying, I've got a resident asking about this, what we're doing about it, and it's always much stronger when it comes from a resident. The second thing I wanted to say very quickly was just about education of ourselves, and I may be again preaching to the choir, but if you ever get a chance to have a mini break down in Sussex, go to the Knepp Estate. We've been there for the last 3 years, just camping for 2 or 3 nights down at the Knepp Estate, which is a wonderful, wonderful example of rewilding on I think it's 3,000 acres of farmland that used to be a traditional arable farm. It's they've had all sorts of wildlife come back naturally. So yeah, it's a great example.
Yeah, Isabella Tree's book Wilding is well recommended. Matt, sorry, did you want to come back in?
Yes. Sorry, it's a new hand. Talking about the stuff about natural flood management, we again, as part of the Derwent Connections project, which is the project that I talked about, which we got through the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, 360,000 households in Derbyshire are going to be getting a letter from us talking about natural flood management. There's a survey in it. Please, can you fill in the survey? And we will be working with parish councils to do more stuff about natural flood management. You know, which is part of that stuff about the Derwent Forest and getting those 30,000 hectares of 30,000 new hectares of woodland within that catchment.
Thank you. Okay, one last question. David Locke, would you like to ask yours, and then we'll wrap up after that?
Yeah, well, I've just about had three answers, people requesting information. It's just about my verge. You know, I'm trying to rewild it and struggling on my bit. I'm looking down and seeing just how much grass there is up and down the road. And I wrote to the council and nothing at all happened. I got emailed twice about 6 months ago, and you know, but now I've got some contacts that I can make. Hopefully we can. I've managed to get about 20 wildflowers grew on the front in little spots, you know, but I'm not really an expert and was hoping for a bit of advice if not. You know, but I'm sure that's going to be forthcoming.
Okay, you've got. Have you got?
Thank you.
Anybody want to just come quickly back on that, or?
Yeah. Can I just say that if when you write to a council officer, make sure you include councillors, because council officers do so much more if they know there's a councillor reading the emails too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I looked at the verge strategy and wrote to the people who were looking after the verges, and it bounced around a little bit, but it came to nothing. But you're right, I should include local councillors.
You can, because we get told to go to only write to the directors. So if you email a councillor, the chances are it will then get forward to the director of service, and they will do something about it. So I might be saying this as a councillor, but councillors have more clout than you think. So make sure you know when you write to the council. If it goes to a council officer, they'll just, you know, they've got thousands of things to do, whereas councillors like to get involved.
Yeah, thank you.
Good advice, and thank you, Matt. So we're just gonna. I think somebody's already posted. There's a whole bunch of, you know, these events are basically trying to raise awareness about climate and the ecological emergency. COP26 is coming up. There are other events happening in the next month or so. Somebody's posted all of those in the chat. Steph, I don't know if you want to say anything about any of these. Do you want to unmute?
Hello, I'll unmute and I'll show my face. I'm not going to say about all of them because there's a lot. The one that I particularly want to say, because as these webinars come to an end, the Chesterfield Climate Alliance and the COP26 Chesterfield and Derbyshire COP coalition has come into being, and we've decided to put on this style of event, a Zoom event, about fracking, showing solidarity with people who are struggling against fracking in other parts of the world. Chesterfield Climate Alliance started up just as fracking was threatening villages in Derbyshire, and so fracking is quite close to our hearts. Our government has put a moratorium on fracking, but that doesn't mean that it's stopped around the world. So we've got speakers booked from north of Canada, Africa, and we're trying to get one from South America, who are currently fighting fracking. And the event is called Not Here, Not Anywhere. So that's on the 26th of October. And if you don't mind coming to Zoom events, please come to that one. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Steph. So we'll wrap this up now, and just to say, you know, to echo what Andrew said earlier, you know, just do something. And I also noticed if you go to University of Derby, they're giving away wildflower seeds today. So if anybody lives in Derby, you can do that. So I just want to say a really massive thank you to our brilliant speakers, Andrew, Matt and Dawn, who've done an absolutely fabulous job of answering the questions and inspiring us all and showing us, you know, a bit of optimism where sometimes, you know, we might struggle for that. So great if we can all show our appreciation. There's a little clap reaction as well if you want to show that. But thank you all so much. As I said, this is the last of the Countdown to COP series, but we have a site visit this afternoon. So, you know, anybody that's not going on a site visit, you're very welcome to leave now. But for those people who are joining the site visit, would you just mind staying on for 5 minutes, just to have a few sort of practical points from Dawn? And I'll stop recording now and let you all get on with the rest of your day. And thank you all, and nice to see you all.